All right. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Garden Hour. My name is Amanda Bachmann. I am the SDSU Extension Pesticide Safety and Urban Entomology Field Specialist based here in Pierre, where we're currently experiencing some really dark, cloudy skies, a little bit of rain, and the occasional bout of thunder. So, crossing my fingers for no hail on this one. And tonight I am joined by three additional SDSU Extension experts. We've got Hans Klopp, who I believe is in the Watertown Regional Center. And Hans, what are you going to be sharing with us tonight?
I am going to be talking about soil health in gardens and just some basic soil health items. And if people have questions about soil management in gardens, they could ask me questions later on in this, or even if it's just about nutrient management.
Awesome, sounds good. We also have Maddie Shires, who is our plant pathology state specialist based on campus in Brookings. Maddie, what are you going to be covering tonight?
Tonight, I'm just going to be talking about some ways to try to prevent early season diseases in our gardens, high tunnels, and ornamental plants.
Awesome. Yeah, with the moisture that we're having, that is going to be really
Exactly.
timely. This is a year that we're going to see some disease.
It's already happening.
Yep. And we also have with us John Ball, our Extension Forestry expert extraordinaire. John, what are you going to be covering tonight?
Well, I'm in Rapid City now, and so we had the storm you're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's been wet here too. But you know what? There's a plus to the moisture, and that is we're seeing a lot of mushrooms coming up. So I'm going to talk about ones you might eat and ones you probably shouldn't. So that's coming up later on tonight.
Awesome. Yeah, that is very important information, and definitely listen to Dr. Ball. Don't listen to your aunt's cousin's dog's, sister on Facebook. And at any point, folks, if you have questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A. We'll field them after each speaker, and then keep an eye on the chat for information from us as far as, links to further information or anything like that. So Q&A for questions, and we'll have some time at the end too.
All right, so my talk tonight is fairly brief, but I just kind of wanted to give everyone some things to be looking out for and some management strategies to keep us from having severe outbreaks of garden diseases. As Amanda said, it is very wet outside and the rain keeps coming, which is great, but it also means that our fungal diseases and bacterial diseases are going to really enjoy infecting plants this year. So yeah, we'll just get going. So I'm not going to talk about many diseases specifically, just more management strategies in general. So some of the things that we came up with to help manage early season garden issues is crop rotations in your greenhouses, high tunnels, and garden spaces, management of airflow, management of moisture and humidity levels, proper nutrition for the plants, and management of insect vectors of disease. So crop rotation is the one that we have had a few disease issues already come in for related to. Rotation of crops throughout your different spaces is a great disease management technique, and that is because our disease levels often build up in residues and soils. So the continual planting of the same types of crops over and over is going to actually increase the disease issues. So if you've had issues with anthracnose or alternaria or pythium or phytophthora, those diseases build up each year. So if you're not rotating to non-host crops, it will eventually get to the point that you can't grow anything in those spaces. Many of our diseases affect the same families of plants. So it's very important, again, to kind of know what you've been planting in certain areas and try to have a 3 to 5 year rotation schedule to help lessen the disease load that is present in those areas. And again, just, repeated planting of garden crops in the same areas can lead to disease outbreaks. Another one that you've hopefully heard before is to not plant your potatoes in your tomato spots and vice versa, because there is a disease that affects each of them and it will spread to both. So just kind of keep those things in mind. This here came from a publication from University of Georgia Extension. And so this is just kind of a general outline of some of our most common families. I know that cucurbits are some of the most highly grown plant families in the state. So if you've grown cantaloupes in the same area for a couple of years, it might be a good idea to alternate with a brassica or solanaceae, just to kind of help break down any disease issues that could be building up. And I actually have an example of that crop rotation. This was a high tunnel that we were working with last year. It had been under continuous cucurbit production for a couple of years. And by the middle of the summer, every couple of plants, we were starting to see these leaf spots. And within a month or so of the first leaf spots, the entire high tunnel was infested with 2 different leaf spot diseases. And we actually determined that that was because we had not been utilizing crop rotation practices. And so this year, that high tunnel has been put into some other type of production to try to help break down those disease inoculums. The next one is just management of airflow. So in garden settings, airflow is really important to help prevent disease, and that's both in your vegetable and fruits and as well as your ornamentals. Many of our diseases thrive whenever we have humid, stagnant air. So making sure that our canopies are open and the air can kind of move through is really important to help keep a lot of our fungal diseases from developing. And again, this can be applied to ornamental and landscape plants. If you watched the Rose mini-series that we did in March, you may have also heard me talk about this. But an example of keeping airflow in a canopy is for roses that are prone to black spot issues. Trimming out that canopy and making sure that air can flow through it will actually help reduce the development of black spot. Moisture and humidity is another one that we need to keep managed. Free moisture is one of the main drivers of in-season disease. So that being disease that's developing after you've planted your plants. All of our diseases, fungal, bacterial, and water modes or oomycetes, however you may know them, thrive on free water, available water to move around in. Free water is kind of that water that remains on leaves for 6+ hours or remains on the soil whenever it's oversaturated. And some of the ones that will pop up with water availability is Pythium, Phytophthora, Fusariums, leaf spots, both bacterial and fungal. They all thrive whenever there's water available on the soil or on the plant. And also in the humidity can be kind of difficult to manage, but taking steps to reduce moisture availability and to increase airflow will help maintain your humidity levels. Some solutions if you're struggling with having too much water or watering the foliage of your plants. Don't use sprinklers or overhead watering on plants unless they have sufficient time to dry before overnight. Our summer overnight hours are kind of that perfect temperature for fungal and bacterial pathogens to start causing infection. So making sure that you're not having water standing on leaf surfaces is a great way to help prevent those disease occurrences. Drip irrigation is always one that we recommend. I know it's not always practical, but it is the best way to help water the plants and reduce the watering of the foliage or the watering of your leaves. Another thing to remember is to not overwater. This actually allows for weak plants, and you'll see a lot of crown and root rots that occur because the plants are not developing good root systems because there's just too much water. Proper spacing of plants when possible will also help keep the water from sitting on the leaves because the leaves are not touching within the canopy. So that's just another one to kind of keep in mind. Proper nutrition is another one, and you kind of think, oh, okay, if it doesn't have enough fertilizer or whatever, it's going to have diseases. But if you actually over fertilize, you can cause diseases. So making sure that you are hitting those nutritional goals and not going over or under with nutrition for plants will help reduce disease issues. Again, plants that are low on nutrition, they're weak and they're prone to having very minor disease issues that will actually lead to death because there's just not enough nutrients there to help fight off the disease. And then on the other side, plants that have too much nutrition, too much fertilizer, they'll also get disease issues because the plant and the soil microbiome that helps fight off these pathogens, it becomes affected. And so our pathogens can actually start an infection too. So just keep in mind that, we're not doing too much on either side for nutrients. And then the last thing I'm just going to quickly talk about is management of insect vectors. So many of our plant diseases are vectored by insects, and I have examples of those on the next slide. These are some cucumber beetles that I took pictures of last year in a high tunnel. So insect vectors, many of our viral and bacterial diseases are vector spread. Fungal diseases can be spread by vectors, but it's less common. Some examples of common vectors are aphids, thrips, beetles, mites, and mealybugs. So it's important to be monitoring your plants and seeing if you have presence of any of these. If you're seeing a lot of lady beetles, you probably have an aphid problem because they're predatory on aphids. Identification and control of these insects early in the season can help reduce disease issues as they're feeding on the plants early in the season, and you might not see symptoms until later in the year as you're starting to actually have your plants come into production. So that is everything I have. Just a plug, I am the director of our South Dakota Plant Disease Diagnostic Clinic. We're a service-based clinic, so if you're having disease issues or have a question about insect identification, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email me or you can look us up online and reach out to our email there. And with that, that is all I have.
Awesome. We have one question for you.
Okay.
Do plant diseases affect raised beds the same way as planting straight in the soil? Should raised beds be rotated as often?
It's all going to kind of be the same principle. You might have a little bit of different types of diseases in raised beds because depending on where you brought that soil in from to raise that bed. But overall, you're still going to have an accumulation of disease if you've planted the same, types of plants in that area. Another thing we're also seeing if you're using weed fabric, that is actually increasing disease pressure too. So it's very important if it's been a couple of years since you've pulled out that weed fabric and worked the soil, it might be a good idea to do that too, because you might be harboring plant pathogens unknowingly.
Yeah, and that weed fabric can also be a place for some of those striped cucumber beetles and squash bugs
That
to hide
too.
out too, if you're leaving it out sort of year to year. So yeah, and Maddie will be sticking around. So if you think of any more disease questions for her, feel free to throw those in the Q&A and we'll try to get to them at the end. And if we don't, you can always put them in the Ask an Expert widget or get in touch with her via email. So thank you, Maddie. And I think we've got Hans ready to go.
So I'm going to talk about soil health in gardens. So soil health is important because healthy soils can retain nutrients and water, but also have good adequate infiltration of water. And if you have a healthy soil, you maintain productivity and retain nutrients and have minimal loss of soil via wind and water erosion. And if you have a soil that has less loss of soil and nutrients, it minimizes the negative effects of it on the environment. And soil is made up of sand, silt, and clay particles, and there also is organic matter, which make up the solid portion of the soil. Then there's pore space, which is comprised of air and water. And soil at a location is formed from geologically deposited parent materials. And in the organic matter portion of the soil, there's a variety of types of organic matter, some which is very stable and lasts in the soil for a long period of time, which is associated with clay mineral. Some is particulate organic matter, which is usually just residue that's deposited there year to year in plant roots and soil organisms. And then there's soluble chemicals in the soil, such as sugars, proteins, and carbohydrates, which is one of the main sources of food for soil organisms. And also, if there's a lot of microbial activity, there's generally more soluble chemicals that are in the soil. And then there's living organisms in the soil and inorganic carbon. And a healthy soil has an adequate organic carbon concentration. It has stable soil aggregates. And it has a healthy and diverse soil microbial community. And the microbial community in the soil can efficiently biochemically process carbon. Like if you have a really high carbon to nitrogen ratio from adding too much high to C to N ratio mulches such as wheat straw or paper, the soil microbes won't very efficiently process it. And it has many living roots in the soil, and it has cover on the soil surface. Important types of soil life are bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, insects, and earthworms. And the microbes are important for creating pores in the soil and decomposing organic materials, making some of the nutrients that were contained in the organic material available to plants. So there's some type of microorganisms, such as fungi, that can create associations with plant roots that will help the soil uptake nutrients. And certain bacteria in the soil can create associations with plant roots and help them fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, which is common in leguminous crops such as beans and peas and clover and alfalfa. And ways to identify whether the soil is healthy in the garden is, here's a list of them. I have pictures of them. I'm just going to go through them quickly because I'm short on time. So one is wet aggregate stability. And to do this, you can take a dry soil aggregate and drop it in water. And if it stays together, your soil has stable aggregates. But if it disintegrates, it has low aggregate stability. Another way is looking at soil color. Soils with greater organic matter are generally darker colored, and subsurface soils are usually lighter colored because they have lower organic matter content. So if your soil is darker, it's usually healthier, although this is usually correlated with soil organic carbon or organic matter. And you can see deeper in the soil core is lighter colored and near the surface is darker colored. Another way to do is to use infiltration, and this is our infiltration kits that the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition and NRCS will give out. And you pour water in here, and if it rapidly goes in, and you have good infiltration. But if it just stays there ponded, you likely have a lot of runoff occurring in your garden. And when the soil is wetted, the aggregates do not stay together, and pores become disconnected, and you have low infiltration and poor water storage, and probably more runoff if you have low infiltration. Another way you can look at soil biology, and if there's a lot of various types of insects and earthworms and nematodes living in the soil, you likely have a healthy soil. But if there's a lack of soil organisms, lack of soil macroorganisms, you likely have poorer soil health. Another way to do it, indication of soil health, is penetration resistance. This is a penetrometer I have a picture of here. And if you can easily stick the penetrometer or a screwdriver or metal pipe into the soil, it's easier for your plant root to move through the soil and move downward into the soil. Whereas if it's really hard, your plant will have difficulty getting its roots to penetrate deeper into the soil. This is also an indicator of compaction. A lot of times below the tillage pan, it'll be a lot harder in gardens. And just visibly looking at soil pores, you can see like this soil I have a picture of here has a lot of pores and is well aggregated, whereas a poor soil will just look like a massive solid structure. And these are the 5 principles of soil health that they talk about: to just keep the soil covered, minimize disturbance, increase plant diversity, keep a living root, and incorporate livestock. A lot of these are essentially the theory behind a prairie ecosystem. So some of these are easier than others to do in a garden, but you also want, like what Maddie says, you want to have careful rotations with what you plant, because diseases can be transmitted between crops planted of a similar type. So keeping the soil covered provides protection on the soil surface and reduces the amount of soil loss through wind and water erosion. And it reduces albedo on the soil surface, which prevents the soil from getting too hot and having greater evaporation occurring from the soil. And if you have organic mulches or organic matter on the surface, it provides food for soil microorganisms and returns more carbon into the soil, which can help maintain soil organic carbon concentration. And reduced tillage leaves soil aggregates intact and keeps pores connected that go through the soil. And generally, when you have reduced tillage, it increases the stability of your soil aggregates and increases your infiltration. And when you till the soil and break it into smaller pieces, organic matter is broken down more quickly, which causes the soil to be less structurally stable. Although it may make some of the nutrients in the organic matter available, it generally degrades soil health to excessively till your garden. Although in gardens, you're kind of stuck with tilling. And having high plant diversity mimics a natural ecosystem. And if you have some rotations with crops that can fix nitrogen, but some that can't, you could reduce your need for inorganic or organic fertilizers that need to be added. And having a diversity of plants can provide food to soil organisms throughout the season. And keeping a living root continuously provides food to soil microorganisms. And there's root exudates that the roots give off that help to form soil aggregates and maintain soil structure. And incorporating livestock was always naturally a part of prairie ecosystems, and they can eat high carbon to nitrogen ratio materials and then release the manure that has a lower C to N ratio, which is closer to what soil microbes like, and can make the nutrients more easily available to plants that were in or plants that they ate. There's my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, or you can see me on my extension website. And these 2 slides we can skip through.
All right, we did have one request of the first pie graph on soil composition, but you did just stop sharing, so
Oh shoot, I can share it back, or they can watch the video on the extension what YouTube page. Won't it be up in like a week?
Yep, it'll be on the extension YouTube channel. And Jane, who asked the question, you can also drop an email to Hans as well, and he can maybe just drop you a copy of that slide in your inbox so that you can take a look at it.
Oh, sorry, I stopped sharing. I was trying to go through it really
Okay,
quickly.
real quick on the dismount there. But yeah, I'll keep an eye on the questions, and we'll probably have some more at the end. Right now, there's a question already for Dr. Ball, but we'll move into his presentation first so we can hear about what's up with all the mushrooms.
All right, here we go. Share. Oh, come on, share. So it should be sharing.
Yep, it's doing the little preview thing. It just hasn't quite made its way through the tubes yet.
All right. It seems, well, it just, for everybody else, it just updated just before I did this. And now it's not letting me go to.
You want to field a question while your screen loads?
Yeah. I think, come on. Screen is paused. Screen pairing is paused.
Oh, that's so weird.
Yeah. Let's see here. Let's try it again. Sorry, people.
Okay, it's sharing.
Let's see if it wants to do it.
All right, looks good.
All right. Sorry, people. You know, everybody's had this with computers. You turn the thing on, you need to do something right away, and it says, oh, I'm going to update. And so just before you turn the computer on here, it said it's going to update Zoom. heaven knows what it did to my computer, but it seems to be working. So hi, everyone. We're going to go over a couple things. First of all, I always give a little update on growing degree days. And yes, they are increasing. We're a little behind from last year, but you know, it changes from year to year. But we're at about 300 in Aberdeen, about 355 for Rapid City. They've been a little cooler this year. And then we hit 400 for Sioux Falls, and you know, it's about where we should be in May. Lilacs are beginning to bloom, crab apples are blooming, so we're kind of getting to that peak of that spring flowering. But with that, of course, we get a lot of pests showing up at that time. And so I do want to mention a couple of insects out there that we do need to be treating for. If you have a spruce or a pine with all these little white dots, those are pine needle scales, and I've been getting lots of pictures of them in the last 2 weeks. People have been out noticing their trees and said, all these little white bumps on the needles of my tree, what are they? They don't move. Well, they're pine needle scale adults. Those are moms. In fact, they're dead moms. Mom died last fall, sorry to say, but all her eggs are underneath her dead body. How's that? And they're hatching and now moving out beyond mom. And those little dots you see in this picture are what we call the crawlers. And yes, they're crawling around. Now they're going to crawl out onto the new tissue and they'll insert their beak in it and they'll suck sap. If you see a few on your tree, it's not a big deal. But if every needle, new needle, in other words, the ones that came out last year, not the ones that are coming out this year, but the new needles from last year, if they're covered with these white dots, it might be worth treating. And our treatments want to be soft. Why? Because lots of things eat pine needle scale. And too often our pesticide treatments do a better job at killing everything eating the pine needle scale than they actually kill the pine needle scales. Soaps will work. Oils will work. Horticultural oils will work. In fact, horticultural oils are one of our best. Just suffocate them. That's a good way to die for a crawler. And it has very little impact on all your other insects. But the mantra we always have to say in extension is read and follow label directions. Oils are great, but if you don't read the label, they're easy to misapply. And if you misapply them, they can actually harm the plant and burn it. But they're really one of our best choices for going out and doing treatments on, you know, a homeowner's tree or two. If it's a big tree and you see a lot of problems with it, call a commercial tree company. They'll have the chemistry that can do a far better job than what you can do with what you can buy at the local garden centers. Oh, and then emerald ash borer is right on target. It's in the pupal stage right now. That's their little resting stage before they become adults. And that we usually see that about mid-May. And yep, we're at mid-May and they're forming that stage. In fact, I can see a couple of wing pads in this picture. So they're just about on target to emerge as adults right after Memorial Day, which is what they've been doing since 2018 in the state of South Dakota. Now, a little bit earlier down in Dakota Dunes, of course, it's been a little warmer down there, but that means this is an excellent time to be treating your trees if you're in the quarantine areas of Lincoln, Minnehaha, or Union County, because that's where we actually have confirmations of the insect. And if you've got a nice looking ash tree, and if you haven't started treating it, you may want to do so because that's the best way to ensure that your ash will survive this epidemic. All right, let's go on to some other stuff. Morels. I was down at Dakota Dunes looking at ash trees and that along the river, and there's lots and lots of mushroom hunters out the last couple of weeks. We've had the perfect conditions, warm soils, wet soils, and they have just been popping. What's hilarious to everyone that goes out mushroom hunting understands this, but there's a lot of people out in the woods, and of course other people are wondering if they found a spot. And so I actually had some people following me thinking I was looking for mushrooms when actually I was looking for insects. But look at the size of this morel. that was collected in an undisclosed location by Yankton, South Dakota. It's huge, but a couple reminders if you're going to go out mushroom hunting, and you better go quick. The season is coming to an end. But first of all, ID and a reminder, do not decide that the few minutes we're spending together is adequate enough information to go out and determine whether a mushroom can be eaten or not. My recommendation, which I always give, still holds, and that is the first time you go out, even for morels, go out with someone who's experienced in going out there and collecting them and preparing them as well. But morels have a hollow stem and cap. If you slice the whole thing open, it's hollow inside, the cap and the stem. And you'll have all these little indentations on the cap as well. Now, you might have been hearing the reports from Montana where they've had a number of people become ill after eating morels. And what they traced it back to, and it was not one event, but a number of events, is people eating raw or very undercooked morels. Now, I'm sure there's somebody watching this says that's the way they eat them. But you know what? It's better safe than sorry, particularly if you've never tried them before. And make sure you properly prepare them and properly cook them in the process. Now, we don't have a lot of mushrooms that look like morels, but right now, popping in the Black Hills are these. They're one of the false morels. Now, if you look at them, to me, they look quite different. Notice the cap is kind of beefier and it doesn't have all those little indentations in it. And the stem is solid and kind of meaty. And the cap is a few chambers to it. To me, they look completely different. But again, if someone says, oh, there's these little cap mushrooms out in the woods and we can eat them, you could end up ingesting these. And these can make you quite ill. So again, my recommendation is go out with someone. And right now, the morels are out, probably for about another week or two, depending where you live. But I'm also seeing a lot of false morels out there, and this is one of several. And I'm finding these in the Black Hills, as I took with this picture. And then I'm also finding them obviously out at the eastern end of our state as well. So no matter where you live, if you've got a good woody environment there, and kind of the standard is if you've got a standing dead elm tree, they usually pop up around there. So in a wooded area, that may be where you want to start your first check. A couple of other things real quick. I've gotten a lot of calls on the spring snow crabapple. I was surprised. A lot of people have the same question. And that is they know the spring snow crabapple does not produce fruit, which is why a lot of people like it. And to me, you're missing the best part of a crabapple, and that's the fall and winter fruit. And it's covered with these white flowers that when they fall, it literally looks like snowdrifts. But the question they ask is this a good pollinator? Do bees like it? The answer is yes. I checked because I thought that's an excellent question, and it is a good pollinator. It does have all the stamens and that, so it does produce nectar and pollen. It just doesn't produce fruit. So if you have the tree in your yard, yes, it will serve as a pollinator for your apple or other crab apple that does produce fruit. And by the way, I'm getting a lot of flower questions right now too on ash. Ash, if you look at the staminate flowers, what we call the male flowers, they look like these little dried up broccoli hanging all over the tree. Those are the male flowers, and those have become infested by the ash flower gall mite. Now, it's not a serious threat because all it does is attack the flowers, but it does leave them looking rather unsightly. And the little stalks you see to the right, those are the pistillate flowers. So those are what we used to call the female flowers, and that's where you're going to find the seeds. But right now, ash is producing the male flowers and the female flowers. And for some of you with allergies to tree pollen, well, if you're sneezing now, it might be an ash tree. And you know what? I mentioned this was going to happen again this year, and it has already. and that is maples dying back. We had a dry fall in the eastern part of the state, incredibly dry. And a lot of our maples went into winter with kind of half a tank. And they're very, very sensitive to desiccation injuries. So maples, birch, and hackberry have all been affected for a second year in a row. Now, this year's not as severe as the previous year. And a lot of them are just like this picture I took this last week. The tops are a little late in leafing out. That's it. In some cases, just the buds desiccated, dried out, and the tree's rebudding already, but the twigs are good. In some cases, some of the twigs are dead as well. But if you notice a couple of branches near the top of your maple or your birch tree that's not really leafing out yet, have a little patience. I had that on the birch tree in my yard, and now the new buds are being set and it's going to fill in. You still might have some dead areas in it. And again, that was due to the dry fall, which allowed for desiccation injury in the winter. And I might add too, a lot of very thin hackberries. In fact, there's some thin hackberries right now that are dropping their leaves already. And again, that's due to the winter desiccation injury. We see this every 5 or 10 years. I was surprised to see it 2 years in a row. But a lot of the hackberries will recover. And by midsummer, they'll be completely leafed out. So it's a temporary problem, not one that requires any treatment, except maybe a little bit of water. And this fall, if it's dry, I know it's hard to believe right now with all the rain we're getting, but then you may need to water these trees, hackberry, birch, and maples, in order to avoid desiccation injury. So, Amanda, that's it for me. I'm going to stop sharing. Apologize to everyone again for that bad start, but here we are. Do we have any questions?
Yes. All right. So your first question, how do you get rid of the trees and shrubs that birds deposit under your landscaped shrubs and trees? They have honeysuckle and chokecherries growing near and sometimes up through the middle of desired shrubs.
Yeah. Yeah, can't shoot songbirds. All right, so we're out of luck there. And you're right, those will also get junipers, will get common buckthorn. And I'm sorry to say, but it's just something you continually do. As long as you got a perch somewhere in there, and that's the ornamentals you like in many cases, you're going to get seeds deposited. And the way I manage it is go out there and pull the little ones as they're started. It's a lot easier than cutting them when they get bigger. And a reminder, do not try herbicide to take out the unwanted trees. Your herbicide will not know the difference between the unwanted and the wanted. So I'm sorry to say, this is just one of those tasks that you just you're going to do as long as you have birds.
Yep.
Get a cat. There you go.
No, don't do that. We should do a whole presentation on the ecological disasters of outdoor cats in suburbia.
Get
yeah,
a cat.
sometimes mechanical
okay, I'm
control
kidding. All
is
right.
the only answer.
I understand. Okay, no cats, no outdoor cats. All right.
They want to be inside. All right. Well, and if folks have additional questions, throw them in the Q&A. I'm going to go through my presentation on some of the insect stuff that's been happening, and then we'll come back together, and if there's any questions, we'll catch up with those at the end. So let's see, after everything we've been doing with sharing screens, let's see how mine does. All right, it says it's loading. Perfect. All right, looks good. Okay, so gonna talk about the periodical cicadas again. I got to go see them. They're still not in South Dakota, but the emergence is really starting to pop off in Missouri, and then it's sort of moving northward. Illinois, their brood is starting to emerge as well. So if you're the kind of person that goes in for some insect tourism, now is the time to head a little bit east and a little bit south. And you can see the image there is of an oak tree, in, suburban front yard, one of the things that my friends who are also entomologists in the Missouri area noticed is that yards that don't have regular grub treatments, those are the yards that have surviving cicada broods. So that was something that they observed in their neighborhood. But you can sort of see where they are on iNaturalist and Cicada Safari. You can see the hosta underneath one of the oak trees. Pretty much the cicadas, as they emerge, they just crawl up. They just want to be up on something in order to shed that nymphal exoskeleton and then have a place for sort of their wings to be able to like hang down and dry properly. And it could be a shrub underneath your actual tree. So it was just really cool to see them all, and the birds and the squirrels and the turtles and the skinks and sort of all of the other critters were getting a start on some really good eating for the next couple of weeks. It's a massive amount of nutrients that get sort of introduced into the ecosystem for a short period of time. So absolutely a cool phenomenon, highly recommend. And then back in South Dakota, some questions that are starting to come in. I've had folks noticing some mayfly emergences. So South Dakota, we have a lot of water. We've got, rivers, we've got the prairie pothole region with a lot of lakes, and mayflies, kind of like cicadas, they will sort of emerge en masse so that they can mate because they have a very short lifespan, so they don't have a lot of time to go on a road trip to find, a partner. And these large emergences do get attention, and mayflies are sort of species specific when it comes to these emergences. So we have them sort of throughout the summer, but they're different kinds of mayflies most of the time. So while you might see a lot of mayflies, they're not harmful. They're actually another critter that's great for the ecosystem. The larvae are aquatic, so they're good indicators of water quality. The adults, they don't bite or sting. They're a great food source for fish. So if you're an angler, when the mayflies are out, if you're a fly fisher person, that's a great time to use a mayfly fly on your rod. And yeah, we don't recommend any sort of control measures for these. They're part of the ecosystem, and just know that their large numbers will be there for only a short period of time. The adults don't have functional mouth parts, so they're really only living for a few days before they mate and the females lay their eggs, and then they die. So, and you can see the image here is one of our mayfly species. They do have kind of like a long tail, or like forked out of their abdomen, which is a distinguishing feature. They're not super great flyers, so you might notice they're a little bit fluttery, and they can range in size. You can see this one was pretty big, but there are some that are smaller. So size isn't like the great identifier here. But yeah, if you're by a body of water in South Dakota, you've probably seen these critters before, and just know that you don't need to do anything to try to manage them. A critter that's a little bit more annoying that the questions have started coming in are the black flies. These are sometimes called buffalo gnats. I'm not sure if it's because of their slightly like humped back or what the deal is, but they are a small black fly, and their larvae develop in running water. So this is another one where if you're close to a body of water, you may experience black flies, and they do bite. So that's not super pleasant, but they're not like mosquitoes where they're sucking your blood out. It is a physical pinch, so it's a little bit of a different sensation, and they are short-lived. I know 3 weeks doesn't seem like a long time, but there is only one generation per year in South Dakota. Once they're done for the year. So there's not really much you can do on an environmental scale for these, because again, they're developing in running water, and that's a resource that we want to have around. So really, if you're out fishing or hiking or in a place where black flies are present, your best bet is to cover your exposed skin and make sure you're using repellents with an EPA-approved active ingredient. I'll say this many times through the season, and Dr. Ball said it earlier too, you always want to read and follow those label directions, and that goes for insect repellents as well. Those labels will tell you what insects and arthropods the repellent is effective against, how long that efficacy lasts, and then what you should do as far as reapplication, and also, washing your skin and laundering clothing when you're no longer, out in, say, black fly territory. So it's I know folks sometimes want like an easy answer, and man, if there was one, we could be very rich and perhaps not doing this, podcast Zoom show. But this is a case where the long sleeve shirt is going to be your best defense against the black flies. And I did want to check in on the monarch migration to see where the monarchs are these days. And you can see we've had one sighting in South Dakota that was reported. There wasn't an image, so the ones with images are a little bit more verified because you can actually see what butterfly they saw. But you can see that they are heading north, and I imagine if you've got milkweed up in your yards that you might start seeing females fairly soon here in the state. So keep an eye out for them, keep an eye out for the eggs, and make sure you've got something flowering in your yard so the adults have a nectar source to keep them going as they move north and start sort of repopulating the species before they head back to Mexico in September. And this article crossed my desk today from Entomology Today on a recent publication. There were some researchers at Michigan State University that were looking at different cultivars of commonly available annuals that you can find in garden centers and seeing what kind of pollinators and how many pollinators were visiting those annuals. They wanted to see with some of those cultivars, were there some that were more attractive to pollinators over others, some that were maybe, some better choices for folks who want to plant a container of annuals, but still want to, attract pollinators and provide some of those floral resources. So while perennials are always a great choice, especially ones native to your area, you can always sort of fill in those bloom holes with annuals. I mean, I've got marigolds. Actually, all these plants here are ones that are in my backyard that are, going to end up in my garden or in containers. So I buy annuals too. They're pretty. But just know that there are some out there that are visited by more pollinators than others. And they found that their top two were two cultivars of begonia, the cocktail brandy, and ambassador rose blush. And then a cultivar of impatiens called accent coral. And I included the link there if you want to check it out to have a link to the full paper as well to see what other cultivars they tried. But I just thought that was really interesting because I know so many people, I mean, myself included, like some of the really pretty annuals that are available at garden centers and local nurseries this time of year. And I also wanted to share some upcoming events, especially because Garden Discovery Festival is this Sunday, May 19th at McCrory Gardens. Is in the afternoon from 1:30 to 4:30. I'll be there with the entomology publications. It looks like it's going to be a really great event. So if you're in the area, we hope to see you there. And then we also have our Backyard Natural Resources webinar series. Our first episode was today over the noon hour, but we have 3 more coming up on May 16th, the 21st, and the 23rd. And then the recordings will be available on YouTube if you can't join us live. And those start at 12:30 Central for each of those. And we've got water is coming up this Thursday, and then next week is grasslands and biodiversity. So with that, I will stop sharing and take a look and see what we've got question-wise. Okay. I have a question about squash vine borer arriving at 850 versus the usual 1,000. Yeah, I mean, growing degree days are not legally binding. There's definitely like a bell curve of activity around those. When I was doing research in grad school and we were scouting for squash vine borers, we wanted to have stuff out so that we were getting consistent zeros before we started seeing them because we were trying to really dial in when they were appearing. So honestly, as far as garden scouting, you can almost like, if you've got plants in the ground, start scouting, just so that you can accumulate those zeros and have kind of a better idea of when that true first sighting is. So degree days are a great guideline, but there are always like microclimates. You could have an area of your yard that's like a little bit warmer than sort of ambient temperature. There's just sort of all sorts of variables. So it's not like squash vine borers are looking at like, okay, 1,000 degrees, it's go time. They can absolutely be active a little bit earlier or a little bit later. And then tiny little black bugs in your house around your bathroom sinks. There's a lot of things that are small and black and can be in bathrooms. I won't say a lot of things, but usually those are drain flies, although I'm really hesitant to nail down an identification without seeing either a picture or a sample. So this is a case where if you're seeing a bunch of them and you can get a few into a container, throw that container in the freezer, and then drop it in the mail to the Pierre Regional Center or the Plant Diagnostic Clinic on campus, we can take a look under a microscope and give you some better advice. Asking us about a problem is great, but a picture truly is worth 1,000 words, and it does make our jobs a lot easier. So I'll throw my email in there, and you can email me afterwards, and we can maybe work on that this week, and I can try to get you a better answer. But that's all I've got for questions in there. If anyone else has questions, feel free to throw those in the Q&A. We'll do a quick around the horn of our panelists here, if there's any other closing thoughts they might have. Maddie, I'll go to you first since you went first this evening, but anything that people should be looking out for disease-wise, any last-minute tips? I know you'll be joining us again later during the garden hour season, but in the meantime, what's your hot plant pathology tip for gardeners?
Just make sure you know what disease you're dealing with. Make sure you know if it's a fungal disease or a bacterial disease, because fungicides don't work on bacteria or virals. So if you ever have questions, feel free to reach out to us at the Plant Diagnostic Clinic.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great resource, and especially for those of you in the Brookings, if you're in the Brookings area, you can just like stop by with a sample. Hans, any last minute words of wisdom about some soil health gardening practices?
I guess I would just say try to minimize disturbance to your garden if at all possible. Like use mulches to control weeds rather than tilling a lot. And have plant diversity in your garden, plant diverse things, make sure of things in your garden, and keep cover on the soil surface to protect it.
Yep, soil cover is really important, especially for keeping down some of those weeds. And John, any words of advice for folks who might be out there going mushroom hunting? I feel like we forgot to mention the ticks that come with mushroom hunting.
Oh, I got covered with those as well. Thank you for mentioning that. You're right. But the other thing I'll mention is so far this has been a spectacular year for bare root tree planting. So all those folks that are getting their windbreaks in with those seedlings, couldn't ask for better weather. Soil temperatures are above 50, even approaching 60. So soils are warm to promote root growth. Air temperatures have been relatively cool to kind of slow down leaf development, and it's been wet. So if you're ever putting in a windbreak, this is the year to do it. If you're going to plant bare root trees, remember you want to plant them before the buds break. They've been in coolers, so they should still be in that stage, but I would certainly get to it relatively quickly. We all know weather in South Dakota can change, and in 2 weeks, we could be sitting at 100 degrees. I don't see a forecast saying that. I'm just saying I've lived in South Dakota long enough. In 2 weeks, we could be standing in a foot of snow or 100 degrees. All right. We just don't know
And
which.
if you're in Rapid City, you can do that in the span of like a city block.
Right. Or morning to afternoon. You
Yep.
know, it's one of those things. So the land of 1,000 different climates, literally.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you to all the panelists for joining me this evening. Thank you to the attendees watching along at home. If we didn't get to your question tonight, you can always reach us on the SDSU Extension website on the Garden and Yard tab. If you go down to Problems and Solutions, you'll find all of our contact information and also the information for the garden hotlines that are active in Aberdeen, Sioux Falls, Pierre, and Rapid City. So with that, I will sign off. Happy gardening, everybody, and we'll see you next week.